Just when we thought the transfer portal is starting to run out of options for the Zags, a high-scoring combo guard out of West Virginia in Jose Perez becomes available, and Mark Few has already made the call. Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, we got some WCC talk to close out the show, as well as a look at two more recruits in the class of 2025 that the Zags have contacted, including a 7'3" big man. We're talking about a 7'3" 16-year-old. We're going to discuss all that. But first, we got to talk about Jose Perez, because the last week has been all about the transfer portal. Really, the last month, 2 months have been a lot about the transfer portal. It's been the biggest talking point for Gonzaga. And ever since Alex Tui decommitted from Gonzaga in the class of 2023, the Zags now have 3 open scholarships. And there's just no way they're not going to use at least one of them on a transfer. And we've seen them be connected to Paul Mulcahy, who just committed to the University of Washington. They were talking to Joe Toussaint out of West Virginia, who went to Texas Tech. They've contacted Jeremiah Williams out of Iowa State. And we've talked about all those guys. We also chatted about Noah Williams from Washington. We chatted about Javon Quinterly from Alabama. There are targets out there for Gonzaga. The list was starting to run a little thin, and that's what we talked about on Wednesday's episode of Locked On Zags. But shortly after that show aired, news that many had been expecting: Jose Perez from West Virginia, another player entering the transfer portal after Bob Huggins' resignation following an incident of using a homophobic slur on a radio station a few months ago, which he still kept his job through that, but then lost his job after getting his second DUI, a particularly horrific DUI that cost him his job, cost him his career. As a sad end to his story, a deserving end, though, if we're being honest, to his story. And now it kind of creates this situation at West Virginia where they had so much talent that they brought in last season, or this season. They brought in Kirk Creasy, they brought in Jesse Edwards. They're going to keep those two guys, but they lose Trey Mitchell. He goes to Kentucky. They lose Mo Wagee. He goes to Alabama. And now they're going to lose Jose Perez. We already mentioned Toussaint, and now Jose Perez is in the portal, looking like he's going to end up at his 4th school. Jose Perez has had a kind of tragic college basketball career. I think that's the best way to describe it. He's a 6'5" guard from the Bronx, out of New York, wasn't highly regarded out of high school, went to Gardner-Webb to begin his college basketball career in the 2018-19 season, spent 2 years at Gardner-Webb and was just excellent. Really, really good for that program. Averaged 15 points per game as a freshman, replicated that as a sophomore, about 6 boards per game, 3.5 to 4 assists per game. His freshman season, he shot 38% from 3. Very encouraging. Never really reached those numbers again, was only 25% as a sophomore in that 2019-20 season. But after 2 seasons of averaging 15 per game for Gardner-Webb, he hit the transfer portal and he went to Marquette for the 2020-21 season. Things never really got off the ground for him with the Golden Eagles. He only played in 10 games due to injury. He only played about 11 minutes per night, averaged 3 points, shot just under 30% from deep. And then that was it for him at Marquette. He transferred. Coaching change there caused part of that decision for him. He transferred down to Manhattan, went back to his home area of New York, and was really, really good at Manhattan in the 21-22 season. Played about 33 minutes per night, averaged 19 points per game, 4.5 assists. Again, the 3-point shooting wasn't there, though, about 26% for him there. And then the Manhattan coach got fired right before the season started, which is just kind of a crappy thing to do to a basketball program. It's a crappy thing to do to the coach, to the assistant coaches, and it kind of hangs your players out to dry, because they would have taken an opportunity to leave had they had that opportunity. Perez did. He entered the transfer portal anyway. He transferred to West Virginia and had his waiver denied, kind of inexplicably. The NCAA is not super consistent with some of the rulings, and a player getting hung out to dry by an administration firing a coach right before the season starts tends to get a waiver to play. Perez did not. And so for the 2022-23 season, he spent it on the bench at West Virginia. So he leaves Marquette because of a coaching change. He leaves Manhattan because of a coaching change. He goes to West Virginia, is deemed ineligible to play by a rather arbitrary ruling from the NCAA. And then, of course, Bob Huggins loses his job at West Virginia, so Perez enters the portal again. I explain all this, A, because it's a unique and, again, somewhat tragic story in college basketball, and B, some people will hear this podcast or see the links between these two schools, between Gonzaga and Jose Perez, I should say, and will look him up and think, wow, he can't stay still. He's they'll think negative things about him because of the multiple schools that he's been at. People thought that about Rasir Bolton, and it was proven to be one of the most erroneous things you could possibly think about Rasir Bolton. He was extraordinarily loyal to Spokane, extraordinarily involved in the community, a fantastic, one of the most outstanding pure human beings that has ever played at Gonzaga. And he was at multiple schools because of an incident with a coach. So sometimes it's not the player's fault. And I guess that's why I wanted to highlight all of this for Jose Perez. Anyway, he enters the transfer portal and is immediately contacted by two schools, Gonzaga and Michigan. No surprises there. Michigan, of course, loses Caleb Love. Somewhat surprisingly, he transfers there from North Carolina. Academic department, or the admissions department, I should say, doesn't admit him to the university. This happened to them 2 years in a row. Caleb Love ultimately goes to Arizona. And now Nimari Burnett, who transferred to Michigan from Alabama, there's some questions about his eligibility. It doesn't sound like it's an admissions issue. It's more of I think he needs a waiver to play another year, and I'm not sure if he's going to get it type of situation. So Michigan's in dire straits for guards. So, of course, they're going to reach out to Jose Perez, the best guard available after Mulcahy and Toussaint make their commitments. The other two schools that have been connected to Perez already are Georgia Tech and Oregon. Georgia Tech just needs talent. Damon Stoudemire running the show there. He might be able to help pursue a player like Perez just because of his pedigree as an NBA All-Star. Oregon is a bit of an odd fit, although they did just lose Devin Cambridge. Cambridge was one of their big pickups in the transfer portal out of Arizona State. He somewhat surprisingly left Oregon and went to Texas Tech. So they kind of, and Cambridge was a 6'5" wing. Perez is a 6'5" guard. So I guess there's some logic there, but I look at Oregon and I think they're going to be really young next year. They have Jackson Shelstead, they have Kwame Evans, they have Mookie Cook, three incoming freshmen who are going to play big minutes for that team. I'm not sure where Perez would necessarily fit, but I could see why they would at least reach out to him certainly there. I think there's some other schools that definitely make some sense that may have contacted him by the time you're listening to this. Cincinnati continues to be a program that really needs some help in the guard room. I could stay at West Virginia if the staff can convince him to stay there. That's always a possibility. Memphis is looking for a guard. They're really in on Javon Quinterly, and I think there's a pretty good chance they're going to land Javon Quinterly. If they do not, I could see them pivoting towards Jose Perez here as well. In terms of his fit at Gonzaga, again, the main thing we're looking for here is somebody to kind of replicate Malachi Smith's role last year. Perez would do that. There are a lot of similarities. He is a 6'5" guard. Malachi Smith was 6'4". He's a guy who scored a bunch of points per game at a low major program. Malachi Smith, of course, 20 points per game at Chattanooga. Perez, 19 points per game at Manhattan. So there are some similarities. I think the biggest thing that I want to see from Jose Perez, or that would make me feel even better about him as a potential addition for Gonzaga's roster, is what he can bring defensively. The shooting is inconsistent. I think he will be a better shooter than he has been in his last couple of years of playing college basketball. But Malachi Smith came in and shot 50% from three for Gonzaga. I don't think Jose Perez is going to do that. I also don't think it's as big of a need on this roster. Steele Venters is a great three-point shooter. Ryan Nembhard is a good three-point shooter. Nolan Hickman has improved as a three-point shooter. Ben Gregg is a good three-point shooter. They have that. Graham Ike, not so much. Anton Watson, I think we'll see a little bit more from him, but not a huge strength of his. But for the guards, for the most part, they have three-point shooters. Dusty Stromer will be a little curious to see how his three-point shooting translates right now, but that's not necessarily a need. What they need is defense, because Ryan Nembhard's not a great defensive player. Nolan Hickman works really hard on defense, and I think he has improved, but he's ultimately not that great either. Steele Venters, I don't think he's going to be a plus defensive player. I think he'll be fine. He's a decent sized kid, so I think that'll help him. But they don't really have a lot of really premier losing Hunter Salas really hurts, and losing Malachi Smith hurts, and losing Rasir Bolton hurts. They lose a lot of defense. So for me, I don't care if Jose Perez is not a good three-point shooter. Again, I don't think he's going to shoot 25% if he came to Gonzaga. I think he'd probably be up closer to that 33, 35 at worst, maybe even better than that. Again, the difference between being your team's primary lead scorer at Manhattan versus being a sixth man at Gonzaga is significant, and I think it would help him improve as a three-point shooter. But for me, I want to see what he can do on defense. If he can come in, play tenacious defense, frustrate people, lock people down on the perimeter, handle screens well, all that stuff, I would love it. I would absolutely love it. If he's going to be a turnstile on defense and let people get past him and not do a good enough job of keeping some of the really, really talented WCC guards in front of him, then it's not as good of a fit. For Gonzaga, I still love that they're reaching out. I still love that they're contacting him, and I think he would be a wonderful addition. I just want to know what that defense is going to look like. Looks like he's only got 1 year of eligibility left. He sat out all of last year, so I think he's going to be ready to go. I don't think injury is going to be an issue for him. I think, not getting to see him at a high major level last year is kind of tough. The only time we've seen him play high major basketball was at Marquette, and it didn't go well. I'm not that concerned about it. Gonzaga so rarely misses on these guys. I think if they think that Jose Perez can play at this level, and certainly programs like Michigan and Oregon are reaching out, West Virginia had him for a year. Like, clearly there are other programs that believe he's a guy who can be a high major contributor. For Gonzaga, I think they're viewing him as more of a 15, 18, 20 minute per game type role. Whether that's what he wants remains to be seen. He doesn't have as much. He can't be quite as picky right now because of what options are out there, but he's the best guard available in the portal. So teams that need a guard are going to reach out to him. And if teams are going to offer him a lot of playing time, Gonzaga might not be the place he ends up. But I think it's a really nice fit, especially if he can be a really good workhorse on the defensive end of the floor. And the fact that Mark Few picked up the phone right away as soon as he became available is definitely a promising sign of their interest in Perez for next season. Well, the Zags have also reached out to a pair of 2025 prospects, including the fantastically named legend Smiley. More on him and the other players they are pursuing in that class, as well as Gonzaga's recruiting strategy after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there is no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Zag fans, perhaps you want to make a bet regarding Marco Gonzalez and the Mariners or Eli Morgan and the Cleveland Guardians. Either way, don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Also want to shout out those everyday listeners. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to the podcast. Of course, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and go hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. We got more fantastic stuff coming your way this week and into next week and the rest of July as well. Got some fun guests lined up. We're going to continue to keep you updated on Summer League, how Chet Holmgren is looking, how Philip Petrusev is looking in his quest to make the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, keep you updated on Drew Timme, Malachi Smith, and Julian Strother as they embark on their professional basketball playing careers as well. We're also going to keep you updated on recruiting, and that's what I want to do here in the second segment on today's episode of Locked On Zags. Talk about two new players that Gonzaga have been connected to in the class of 2025. They've already connected to three players. There already have been connected to three players in the class, at least that we know of. So this makes 4 and 5. First up, I teased him in the teaser there. Legend Smiley, an incredible name. 6'5" combo guard out of Seattle. He actually is at Garfield High School, where Brandon Roy became very, very famous back in the day. Right now, 24/7 Sports has him as a 3-star prospect. They have him ranked 123rd in the class, so he's still a top 150 guy. I also would say that 2025 rankings just don't mean all that much right now. I wouldn't say they mean nothing, but they don't mean much. These kids are so young. There's still a lot of time left in their high school basketball playing careers. Players could rocket up the list. They could rocket down the lists. Heck, they might not even mature and get to their best self until they get into college. Corey Kispert was 125th. So seeing Legend Smiley down at 123 shouldn't be something that is overly concerning in terms of Gonzaga recruiting. They recruit the guys they want to recruit, and they have a very good success rate with high school recruits. So Legend Smiley, 123rd in the class right now. Again, 6'5" combo guard out of Seattle. He's also been contacted by a lot of programs that lead me to believe that there is belief he's going to be better than your traditional 3-star prospect. Alabama has contacted Legend Smiley, UCLA, Utah, Oregon, USC, UW. So basically half the Pac-12 and Alabama, as well as Minnesota and Boise State, among a handful of other programs as well. So love seeing Zags in on local talent. I think that's something that we've seen them do a little bit more, but they tend to not get as many Seattle area guys, partly because for a long time, Lorenzo Romar just ruled the Seattle market, got all the high premier talent players to come to University of Washington, didn't do anything with all of this talent on his program. That's been the long time knock on Lorenzo Romar, but now Gonzaga's starting to get a little bit more into that Seattle market. We're seeing them creep in a bit. And Legend Smiley, Zoom Diallo, of course, has transferred to Prolific Prep in California, but he's a 2024 target for the Zags, has listed Gonzaga in his top 6 and went to high school in the Tacoma area. So it's nice to see Gonzaga once again checking out a player locally in Legend Smiley. They've also contacted a player who is very not local in 7'3" center Rocco Zikarsky. He is out of Australia. More specifically, he is out of the NBA Global Academy in Australia, the same place that Alex Tui, former Gonzaga commit, also is from as well. 24/7 Sports does not have him ranked. They don't tend to rank a lot of international players very often, certainly not 2025 prospects internationally. I don't blame them there. He is, however, ranked at On3, another premier recruiting service, and he's ranked 13th in the class of 2025 and a 4-star prospect at On3. Again, if we're not going to take a relatively low ranking too seriously for Legend Smiley, we probably shouldn't take a very high ranking for Rocco Zikarsky super seriously. But we're also talking about a 7'3" player. 7'3" as a probably 16-year-old is my guess here. Tremendous stuff here, playing in that Global Academy in Australia. Like we said, lots of premier talent have played at that program, are still playing at that program. And this player, and Zikarsky here, has been contacted by a litany of premier college basketball programs. Duke has reached out. Michigan has reached out. Iowa, Florida, Arizona, Georgetown, Utah, and of course, Saint Mary's. No debate that Saint Mary's was going to be on here. I'm shocked Purdue's not on this list. I bet they will be in time. Matt Painter loves his big dudes. Got anybody over 7'2". Matt Painter's all over them at Purdue, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them reach out here at some point. But of course, St. Mary's is going to leverage those connections that they have in Australia to see if they can land Zikarsky. Don't know a ton about his game, but like I said, 7'3", really intriguing to be able to add a player of that size to Gonzaga's program if they're able to make this happen. Zikarsky and Legend Smiley joined Jalen Harrelson, Isaiah Harwell, and Nick Kamenia as the 5 known Zag targets in the class of 2025. That does not mean that there are not more players Gonzaga has contacted, has chatted with, has scouted, has whatever. But those are 5 players that it has been reported in some social media platform that Gonzaga has been interested in them. And I think it's notable because Harrelson, Harwell, Kamenia are all 4 or 5-star prospects. Smiley, again, is a 3-star guy, but still a top 150 prospect. Zikarsky's considered one of the premier international players, at least right now, in the class of 2025. And I think we've been seeing some conversation on social media a little bit about Gonzaga's recruiting. Some concern. I think Tui decommitting was a bit something that kind of ruffled some feathers a little bit for Gonzaga recruiting. And I think because college basketball is moving towards the transfer portal, and Gonzaga has always been very good at using the transfer portal, and they're continuing to utilize it really well. I mean, Ryan Nembhard, Graham, EK, Steele Venters is an incredible recruiting class out of the transfer portal. I think there's concern about Gonzaga's actual recruiting. And I find this funny because like Dusty Stromer and Jun Sok Yo is like a top 6, maybe top 5 recruiting class in Gonzaga's history. I mean, and Gonzaga's history predominantly hasn't been high-level recruiting except for recently. Of course, there's Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren and Hunter Salas and Nolan Hickman and Zach Collins and so on and so forth. But Gonzaga hasn't historically recruited a bunch of 4- and 5-star American prospects. And yet Dusty Stromer is a 4-star American prospect. Yo is one of the best international prospects they've brought in a really long time. Now they're looking at 3 5-stars in the class of 25. Like, Gonzaga is trying to continue to recruit premier domestic talent. And I'm not sure where criticisms are coming from, why there's concern about Gonzaga's recruiting. Like, oh, I don't know if they'll be able to keep it up in the transfer portal. Why wouldn't they? They've been good at recruiting in the transfer portal since long before other programs did. And yes, more programs trying to use the transfer portal could dilute the talent that is available to Gonzaga, but Gonzaga is not just out there reaching for the best players. That's not what they do. They didn't go out there and try to throw a huge bag at Hunter Dickinson. They didn't go after some of the premier talent in the transfer portal. They went after fit. They went after guys that they believe fit their program and their culture. And that's all they've ever done. Whether it's high school players, whether it's international players, whether it's junior college players, which they haven't done in a long time, but they have in the past, whether it's the other Division I transfers, high major transfers, mid-major transfers, low major transfers, whatever it may be, Gonzaga is just looking for fit. If Corey Kispert is a player they believe fits their program, they don't care that he's ranked outside the top 100. And why would they? He ended up becoming a top 15 pick in the NBA draft. So to me, I just think, yeah, recruiting is changing. And high school recruiting is going to be a little bit less valued over transfer portal recruiting. I think a big part of this too is that these high school classes are pretty weak. 23 is considered one of the weakest high school classes we've seen in a really long time. 24 is considered fairly weak as well. COVID really did a number on these high school basketball players, impacting their ability to be at the same development level that we're typically used to seeing high school seniors, incoming freshmen be at. So for Gonzaga, you have weak high school classes. You have the ability to add transfers immediately to your program. You have players who want to come to Gonzaga, who know they can go to the NBA from there. So of course you're going to prioritize adding players who've already played at the Division I level. I would rather have the starting point guard from Creighton over basically any high school player ever. Honestly, I really would. And so I think that it's not a shock to see Gonzaga pivoting this way, but it's also worth acknowledging they're not just giving up on high school recruiting. They already got their name in the bag for 5 high school players in the class of 2025, most of who are pretty highly regarded already. So I just think that Gonzaga is doing what Gonzaga does, and I wouldn't be overly concerned about how they're doing it, where they're finding talent, what's changing, what's shifting. Gonzaga seems to always be ahead of the curve, and that's one of the things that has made Mark Few such an incredible Hall of Fame caliber coach throughout his career. Well, a listener submitted question about the number of WCC teams who will go dancing is how we are going to close out the show today. All that coming up right after this. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, and we're switching away from talking about recruiting and transfer portal additions to talk about a question I received on Discord. For those of you who are not familiar, I started a Discord channel for Locked On Zags, for Gonzaga community in general, kind of in response to Twitter. Circling the drain, I guess, is the best way to put it for what's going on with Twitter. I haven't joined Threads yet. That's the new Instagram Meta-owned social media platform that's supposed to be similar to Twitter. Haven't checked that out yet. We'll let people know if and when I do. But Discord is a great way to communicate with fans anymore, with just fellow Gonzaga community members. I'll post a link to it at the bottom of the show notes, but I have a section on there called Mailbag Questions. People can submit questions that will get answered on the show. This one came from @Sentient on Discord. He says, 2-part question, over under on 2.5 bids for the WCC. And if there was going to be a third bid outside of Saint Mary's and Gonzaga, who would you pick? Obviously, it's a little bit early for this topic. There's still some roster churn that's going to happen, some potential additions, subtractions that could happen for some teams, probably more or less set at this point for most of the teams, but you never know. Things could change. Certainly schedules will have an impact as well. If certain teams can load up their non-conference with some more premier teams and win some of those games, that's going to help their ability to make the NCAA tournament. But all caveats aside, I'm going to say under. I'm going to say there are going to be 2 bids out of the WCC. I know that is not a bold prediction by any stretch of the imagination. Everybody who covers college basketball out there is going to say Gonzaga and Saint Mary's are making the NCAA tournament out of the WCC. Most people are not going to pick anybody else. Almost nobody is going to pick less than Gonzaga and Saint Mary's unless they're just really not paying attention to what's happening in the West Coast Conference. So I'm going to stick with the majority here. I'm going to say Gonzaga, Saint Mary's make the 2024 NCAA tournament, and then that is it out of the WCC. But I will spend a little bit more time on the second part of this question. If there is going to be a third bid outside of Saint Mary's and Gonzaga, who would you pick? Right now, I see three schools that I think have a reasonable path to making the NCAA tournament based on the talent on their roster right now. I don't know schedules yet, so it kind of depends on that. But I don't think any of these teams are going to beat Gonzaga or St. Mary's, so it would be a three-bid situation. Maybe they can pull off an upset in the WCC tournament. Even getting into the championship game might be enough for one of these teams, depending on how the rest of their resume shakes out. The three programs we're going to talk about are Santa Clara, San Francisco, and LMU. Shouldn't be a huge shock to people who've been paying attention to the WCC that those are the schools most likely to be in that conversation at the end of the year. We'll start with Santa Clara. Santa Clara made some nice additions to their team. Adama Ball out of Arizona is an addition I'm very excited about for them. I think there's a chance he could be the next Jalen Williams, Brandon Pajemski type. He's not the same player as Pajemski or Jalen Williams, but again, 2 years in a row, Santa Clara has had a player get selected in the top 20 of the NBA draft. Jalen Williams went 12th overall to the Oklahoma City Thunder and had a rookie season, proving that he probably should have gone even higher than that. Brandon Pajemski got drafted 19th by the Golden State Warriors this last year. Really fun fit for him in Golden State alongside Steph and Chris Paul and Klay Thompson. And I think Adama Ball is the next guy who could kind of be that. He's transferring from Arizona. He spent 2 years with Tommy Lloyd. He basically didn't get off the bench in those 2 years. Highly regarded French prospect. And I think that there's a chance he really blossoms in an on-ball role at Santa Clara. They also had a big man from Virginia and Francisco Cafaro, a guy who's a good rim protector. Didn't score a ton, but part of that is because Virginia limits possessions, so you don't get as many points overall. However, they do lose Pajemski, of course, as we talked about. They also lose Carlos Stewart, who was very, very good last year, really killed Gonzaga. He transfers all the way across the country to LSU. They lose Parker Braun, who transfers to Kansas to be kind of a legacy there after his brother Christian Braun, of course, helped lead Kansas to a championship and then helped lead the Denver Nuggets to a championship in the NBA. And they also lose Jalen Bediako, who goes to Seton Hall. So a lot of talent out at Santa Clara, but some good talent coming in, and I think Herb Sendek is one of the best coaches in the conference. And this team has been on the precipice of being an NCAA tournament team in the past, and maybe if they can put it all together this year, win some games early in the season, some non-conference games, get some premier ones on the calendar, perhaps they could be in that conversation. San Francisco, I spoke with Coach Chris Gerlofson on an episode of Locked On College Basketball very recently. Anybody who has not checked that out, highly recommend it. It's a great WCC show. We talk a lot about conference realignment, about the various coaches in the WCC, and Gerlofson also gives us a really good insight into the players that they have brought in this year. Of course, they lose Khalil Shabazz, one of the best players in San Francisco basketball history. They also lose Tyrell Roberts, transfer from Washington State, who was a big part of what that team did last year. They also lose Zane Meeks, who was their starting center. He transferred to Arizona State, but this program brings in Mike Sheriff Jamps, aka Mongolian Mike, top 100 prospect who spent last year at Dayton. He's going to be their point guard, and he's 6'8". It'll be fun to see how that shakes out for the Dons. They also have Malik Thomas from USC, top 100 prospect who went to USC, only averaged about 2.5 points per game last year, transfers out because, of course, Boogie Ellis returned. They also had Isaiah Collier, the top point guard in the class of 2023. And they add some kid named Bronny James. So USC doesn't have a lot of room in their backcourt. Malik Thomas hits the portal, goes to San Francisco. They had Jonathan Magbo, a big man from Missouri State who averaged 8 and 7. They also add Todorovic, who is a sharpshooting guard from SMU. I think Gerlofson's a really good coach. I think they put a really good roster together here. They also made the tournament fairly recently, so that might be in the minds of Selection Sunday committee members. But again, they have to have a dominant non-conference slate in order to make this happen. And then finally, LMU. LMU is perhaps the most improved team, and they were really good last year as well. Coach Stan Johnson did an excellent job with that program. They added some serious talent to this roster. They add Justice Hill from LSU. He was a starting point guard in the SEC, and now he's heading to the WCC. Justin Wright was a double-digit points per game scorer at NC Central. Will Johnston was a double-digit point per game scorer at UTRGV. Lars Dieman was a big man from Cal, big bodied dude. He's coming down to the WCC level and should be a rim protector and a force down on the block for the Lions. And of course, they had Dominic Harris from Gonzaga as well. So I think LMU is a team that I got to see how Johnson's going to put all the pieces together here. They have a lot of new guards coming in, multiple different guards. How are they going to fit them all together? Are they going to start multiple guards? Are they going to have somebody come off the bench? What that's going to look like There's a lot of kind of moving parts for this LMU team, but I wouldn't be shocked if they get all the pieces going at the right time, that this team could make some serious noise in the WCC. Are they going to have enough of a non-conference success, especially when they're such a new team and putting it all together? Like, that's going to be hard for them to win some marquee games. It's hard to schedule marquee games, but especially hard to win them. If LMU can find a way to win a couple big games in the non-conference, beat Gonzaga or Saint Mary's at least once in the WCC, maybe make it to the WCC championship, suddenly they have a resume that is at least in that conversation. I think any of these teams maybe don't need to beat Gonzaga or Saint Mary's in the championship in order to get that automatic bid, but if they don't, there's a reason I'm picking two. If they don't get there, I just don't know if I see any of these teams being able to put together a resume that's going to get them into the NCAA tournament. But again, San Francisco did it 2 years ago. It's not impossible to do. It's just very, very difficult. All right, folks, that is going to wrap us up for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Locked On Zags podcast. It is very much appreciated. Whether this is your first time, 10th time, 150th time, doesn't matter. I appreciate every single one of you. Of course, shout out especially to those everyday listeners, though. Always appreciate people who take time daily to listen to Locked On Zags. That is very much appreciated. More fantastic stuff coming your way later this week. And of course, heading into next week as we continue to look at Summer League and what Gonzaga is going to do with those final roster spots. Again, thank you so much all for listening. Until next time, go Zags.